Whether you are a beginner or a slightly more experienced player, there are certain mistakes that all of us have to go through in order to get better at the game. But if we would have just learned about these mistakes early on, that could have saved us weeks, months, if not years of failing over and over and over again to get to the point we are at today. So, today I figured I'd go over some of the most common mistakes that new players do, and if you're watching this as an experienced player, odds are you're still doing them as well. So let's just dive into it. The first overarching larger mistake that I see a lot of newer players do, not to say it isn't extremely common with more experienced players as well, especially if those players are Loba mains, I'm talking about overlooting. By making that fancy armor, the nice attachment, or the fully kitted backpack your priority, the players end up being late for every rotation, they end up missing crucial moments in the game, and more often than not end up dying in an unfavorable fight that they shouldn't have been in the first place. And even worse, by spending the whole game looting, instead of playing more aggressive, taking risks, or pushing their limits, they're also stagnating skill-wise, barely learning as much as they would have taking a more aggressive playstyle, and continuing down this route means it will take them a very long time to actually become as good as they could be by simply taking a few more risks. Instead of playing so slowly on the edge of the map while making sure you have the perfect everything before you start going for any fights, drop hot. Or if that's too much, drop semi-hot, which is right near the action, and then just rotate in and clean up. Take some fights and learn what works and learn what doesn't. This is a way better use of your time than running around and just looting. Like, if you're just gonna spend the whole game looting, at that point you might as well just download pictures of loot and pull it into a folder on your desktop or something, and you can just do that all day instead. Not to mention that playing slowly and looting everything is honestly kind of boring. Like, how are you even enjoying the game playing like this? God. I also see a lot of players make some very questionable loadout choices. Now, I've released quite a few weapon tier lists in my days, so trust me, I know all about bad judgment, but for whatever reason, I still see so many beginners opt to use some really bad guns. And whenever I have asked them, they always tell me that, actually, the alternator beams just as hard as the R301 or some other uneducated take. It doesn't. I have numbers. They prove you're wrong. Maybe the alternator is easier to control, which is why you're saying it beams harder, but that's just a skill issue. Leave your comfort zone, use a gun that's actually good, and you'll notice immediate results. The most common example I see of this are players who use the, as I mentioned, alternator or the RE45 instead of an actual good light weapon like the 301 or the R99 or the car SMG. The previous guns are crutches at best, and at worst, they're actually holding you back from your full potential. So for the love of God, just switch them out. There are also two settings that I recommend anyone playing the game immediately change, because by default they are set to some horrible game-losing values. The first is taking damage closes death box, which, you guessed it, makes you taking damage closing a death box. This will make it impossible for you to swap your armor in the middle of a team fight, because the second you get shot at, it will close the box. But it will also make it impossible to craft or loot when you are outside of the ring, because the zone damage will keep forcing your looting window down. It's super frustrating, so just make sure to set this off. Other than that, not many players change the FOV ability scaling to disabled, which is definitely something you want to do. The difference between the setting being on or off when you play the affected legends like Octane or Bloodhound is enormous, and you'll notice the difference instantly. Beginner players, and let's face it, most Loba mains, have a very poor sense of positioning, and who can blame them? It's kind of hard to get down and requires a lot of game sense, knowledge about angles and whatnot to actually know where to even begin. But there is one rule I heard forever ago that is incredibly valuable for anyone trying to improve their positioning, and I think that anyone, no matter whether they have 10 hours or 10,000, will benefit from this. Because, I guess now that I think about it, this mistake goes all the way up the ladder to some of the top-rated masters as well. I'm talking about the 2/3 rule, where in a gunfight you want 2/3 of your screen to be behind cover, with only the last third of the screen being exposed, and ideally only having one enemy visible in that window at a time. Keeping this in mind will naturally gravitate you towards better positions and angles, and as long as you don't keep your backside exposed, you will be fine. Unless you're playing Loba, in which case, do keep your backside exposed. And then, I'll be fine. Another macro, so overarching or larger decision mistake that I sadly see a lot of new players make is a painful one. We have gone through millions of years of evolution, perfecting our brain through studies, experiments, and learning more and more about the world through science to become the most advanced civilization on Earth, being the apex predator and breaking out of the food chain completely. But so many players still for whatever reason, completely lack the ability to use their brain. I guess you could apply this to most of the other things in this video, but this one in particular doesn't need that much experience or knowledge, just the ability to rub two of your brain cells together. Specifically, so many players do not think about what they do and instead seem to act on impulses, making the first decision that comes to mind whenever they see an enemy or a loot or whatever. Sometimes this works out, and sometimes this leads to two teams sitting in one position each and shooting at each other over and over and over again for minutes, draining their resources and having all of these gunshots attract attention from the rest of the lobby. You have to recognize when you're stuck in a stalemate and either try to force something to happen or leave the fight before the third parties start rolling in. I have another rule specifically for this situation that I like to call the egg timer rule, where I take an egg timer, twist it around for some arbitrary time, and then once it rings, if I haven't made any progress in the team fight, it's time to get out. Depending on the situation, you generally only want 10 to 30, but in some extreme cases, 60 seconds of a stalemate before you find yourself stuck in a position that you cannot get out of. Using your brain just a little bit before getting stuck in these positions will stop you from losing so many winnable games that it's not even funny. Another extremely common mistake that many players, but definitely more of the beginner players do, is having the same decision making and attention span of a golden retriever puppy. And I blame social medias like TikTok for that. This short attention span is making it impossible for some of you to focus on your goal, even if it's just for a short game of Apex, which at most lasts something like 25 minutes. By never deciding on what you and your team need to do in order to win and having a clear plan in the back of your head of how you should get into the zone, what fights you should take, and what fights you should avoid, because yes, some fights are not good fights, and no matter how enticing they look, sometimes it's more important to get into the zone or into a good position rather than dying in the slugfest. You and your teammates are bound to bounce between whatever is the most interesting at the moment, that being a team fight, some loot, a care package, or whatever you think is super important. Always set a plan and always stay on the move to make sure you're moving towards that end goal. If you keep reminding yourself of what the plan is, you are way less likely to get distracted and end up losing without getting anything else done. And oh man, this one is almost cathartic to talk about because I made so much content around this, and every time I do, there's just so much backlash. I'm not sure if it's copium or just plain stupidity, but either way, it's wrong. I'm right, these guys are wrong. I'm talking about pay-to-win skins. Apex has so many pay-to-win skins, and they all provide a massive advantage, especially at the start of the game when most players haven't had the chance to find any decent sites. The difference between some skins is massive, where one player may have a hard time tracking whatever their enemies are doing, while the same enemies can see them back without any problem at all. And even worse, some skins are paid to lose, where you can get skins that block even more of your view, which makes it even harder for yourself to get some kills for the low cost of $19.99. But despite that, so many players insist that skins don't have an advantage, and it gets me going to even think about it. But that's for another video, so if you want a full complete list of all pay-to-win and pay-to-lose items in Apex, because it's not just skins, there's a lot more things to it, check out the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace out.